Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast. Today, we're going to be stepping back in time
Ooh.
to explore a fascinating collection of texts,
Okay.
excerpts from Sahih Muslim Hadith, Book 16,
Right.
the oath, establishing responsibilities of murders, fighting, requital.
Wow.
It sounds pretty intense, I know.
Yeah.
But trust me, these stories, they offer like a window into early Islamic society
I see.
and how they wrestled with issues like justice, oaths, and, well,
Yeah.
murder.
You're right. It might sound a bit heavy at first glance.
Yeah.
But what's really fascinating is how these stories reveal not just the legal principles, but also the human dilemmas and the moral complexities that arise when you're dealing with such serious matters.
Yeah.
And Sahih Muslim, for those who might not be familiar, it's
Okay.
a collection of hadith,
Right.
essentially records of the Prophet Muhammad's sayings and actions.
Got it.
It's considered one of the most authoritative sources in Islamic tradition. And Book 16 dives specifically into these legal matters.
Okay, so let's jump into one of the most prominent stories in this book,
Okay.
the case of Abdullah b Saul.
Yes.
It unfolds in Khaybar,
Mhm.
which was a Jewish settlement at the time,
Right.
and it involves a murder mystery,
Oh.
suspicion, and a very surprising resolution.
Absolutely. This story is recounted actually a few times in the book,
Oh, wow.
with slight variations, which kind of emphasizes how central it was to legal discourse at the time.
Interesting.
Abdullah and his companion Muhayyisa are in Khaybar.
Okay.
They get separated for a time, and tragically, Abdullah is found murdered.
Oh, no.
His companions immediately suspect the Jewish community, but they lack direct evidence.
Right, and so they bring the case to the Prophet Muhammad seeking justice.
Yeah.
It's interesting how this story highlights the challenges of establishing guilt without clear proof. Something that, even legal systems today still grapple with.
Exactly. And the Prophet, in his wisdom, proposes a solution called qasama. Yeah. It's a process where 50 people from the accusing side have to swear an oath attesting to the guilt of the accused party.
Now, qasam itself is interesting because it actually predates Islam.
Oh, wow.
It was a practice in pre-Islamic Arabia,
Huh.
showing how early Islamic law often adapted existing customs.
Interesting.
But it also raises questions about the reliability of oaths, especially when there's a lack of physical evidence.
It definitely makes you think about the weight of oaths and how much trust was placed in them back then.
Yeah.
And in this case, the companions are actually hesitant to go through with qasama.
Right.
They didn't personally witness the murder.
Right.
And they're uneasy about relying on oaths taken by non-Muslims.
Okay, I see.
And this hesitation reflects the tensions and the distrust that sometimes existed between these communities.
Yeah, I can see why they'd be apprehensive.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
So here's where it gets really fascinating.
Okay.
The Prophet recognizes their concerns and, in a surprising turn of events, decides to pay the blood money himself.
Wow, that's a powerful gesture.
It is.
It really shows his commitment to upholding justice
Yes.
and protecting all members of the community, regardless of their faith.
Absolutely. It speaks volumes about his sense of responsibility for those under his leadership.
Yeah.
He doesn't want an innocent party to be unjustly punished.
Right.
And he also doesn't want the situation to escalate into further conflict between the Muslims and the Jewish community.
I know there's also this recurring detail that I found quite humorous.
Oh, yeah.
Saul, the narrator of this story, mentions getting kicked by a camel from the blood money payment.
Oh, that's right.
It's mentioned multiple times, almost like an inside joke.
It is a bit odd, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some scholars suggest it might be a way to emphasize the story's authenticity,
Right?
like a quirky detail that sticks in your memory
Yeah.
and adds this human touch.
Or maybe it's a subtle reminder that even acts of justice can have these unintended consequences.
Oh, that's a good point.
Like here the prophet is trying to resolve a conflict peacefully, and then bam, someone gets kicked by a camel from the very payment meant to bring peace.
That's a great point. It underscores that even with the best intentions, navigating complex legal situations can have unexpected outcomes.
Yeah,
And it definitely adds a memorable element to the story.
right. So moving on, Book 16 doesn't shy away from some of the darker aspects of early Islamic law.
That's true.
One story that particularly stands out, and it might be difficult for some listeners to hear,
Yeah.
is the punishment meted out to a group from the tribes of Ukal or Urena.
Yes. This is a challenging story, even considering the historical context.
Yeah.
A group of people from these tribes, they convert to Islam and they migrate to Medina.
Okay.
but they struggle to acclimate to the new environment, particularly the climate.
And the prophet, showing his compassion, advises them to drink camel milk and urine for their health.
Right.
I know that sounds bizarre to us today.
Yeah.
But camel urine was considered to have medicinal properties in that time and place.
Yeah. Exactly. Traditional medicine often utilized remedies that might seem strange or even repulsive to us now.
Yeah.
The key takeaway here is the prophet's concern for their well-being. He's trying to help them adapt and survive in this new environment.
However, the story takes a shocking turn.
It does.
This group, after seemingly benefiting from the prophet's advice, betrays the community.
Right.
They kill the shepherd tending to the camels they were entrusted with and steal the animals.
This act is seen as a grave offense on multiple levels.
Oh, wow.
It's a violation of trust, it's a theft of valuable property, and it's a murder.
Yeah.
But what makes it even more serious in the eyes of early Islamic law is that it's perceived as apostasy, a rejection of their newly embraced faith.
And the punishment is severe.
Yes, it is.
Their hands and feet are cut off, their eyes gouged out, and they are left to die in the sun without water.
It's a difficult account to read.
Yeah.
And it's important to approach it with sensitivity and an understanding of the historical context.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
While we might find this punishment shocking and inhumane today, it reflects the severity with which apostasy, murder, and theft were viewed in that time and place.
That's right.
These acts weren't simply seen as crimes against individuals, but as threats to the stability and security of the entire community.
Exactly.
That's a stark reminder of how drastically societal values and legal systems can evolve over time.
They do.
I imagine this story might evoke strong emotions in our listeners.
Understandably.
And it's important to remember that we're exploring this text not to condone or justify these actions, but to understand the historical and legal landscape of early Islamic society.
Of course.
It's an opportunity to reflect on how our own understanding of justice and punishment has shifted over the centuries.
I agree. It's not about imposing our modern values on the past, but rather about using these accounts as a lens to examine the complexities of law, morality, and the human condition across different times and cultures. It prompts us to ask difficult questions about the purpose of punishment. The balance between retribution and rehabilitation. And how societies grapple with acts that are deemed to threaten their very foundations.
So we've seen examples of both mercy and harshness in these stories from Sahih Muslim Book 16.
We have.
It's a fascinating tapestry that reveals the complexities of early Islamic jurisprudence.
Indeed, and we'll delve further into this tapestry, exploring instances of retribution and forgiveness, which offer an even more nuanced view of the legal principles at play. But we'll save that for the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
It's like, as we explore these legal precedents, it becomes clear that, the value of life was paramount in early Islamic society.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about protecting those already living, It's also about safeguarding life in its earliest stages.
That's right. This next section of Sahih Muslim Book 16 delves into a particularly fascinating and kind of thought-provoking topic.
Okay.
The concept of diet. Or blood money.
Yeah.
Applied to cases involving a fetus.
Interesting.
It really pushes us to examine how early Islamic jurisprudence grappled with the complexities of life before birth.
These cases often involve situations where a pregnant woman is killed or suffers a miscarriage due to an act of violence. And what's striking is that the rulings consistently emphasize that even an unborn child has a right to compensation.
It really highlights the sanctity of life from its very beginning, a principle that's deeply ingrained in Islamic teachings. This idea of protecting life in all its forms seems to be a recurring theme throughout these legal texts.
Exactly. It's not just about punishing the guilty, it's also about acknowledging the loss of potential. The loss of a life that could have been. And this principle extends even to cases where the pregnancy is in its early stages, reflecting a deep respect for the potential for life from the moment of conception.
Now, it's important to note that even back then, there were dissenting voices who challenged this concept.
That's true.
Some individuals argued against paying diet for a fetus, claiming that it's not a fully formed person and therefore doesn't warrant the same level of compensation.
Their argument seems to stem from a more literal interpretation. Focusing on the physical development of the fetus. They might have argued that a fetus doesn't possess the same rights or legal standing as a person who has already been born.
But the Prophet Muhammad strongly rebukes this line of reasoning.
He does.
Even comparing it to the practices of soothsayers.
Wow.
That's a pretty harsh comparison, don't you think?
It is, and that comparison is really significant.
Yeah.
It implies that dismissing the value of an unborn child is akin to relying on superstition and ignorance.
Oh.
Rather than divine guidance and established legal principles.
Right.
It reinforces the idea that all life, regardless of its stage of development, holds this inherent value.
So by rejecting these dissenting voices, the Prophet firmly establishes the principle that even a fetus deserves protection.
Yeah.
And that harming an unborn child carries serious consequences.
Precisely, and this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Especially when we consider the modern implications. This concept of diet for a fetus might seem unfamiliar, even strange to some listeners.
Right.
But it raises questions about the very definition of life and the legal status of the unborn, debates that continue to resonate even today.
It makes you think about how different societies and legal systems throughout history have grappled with these complex issues.
They have.
Like, for example, the concept of diet for a fetus has parallels with modern legal concepts, like wrongful death lawsuits.
Oh, interesting.
Where compensation is awarded for the loss of a life, even though the victim is no longer alive.
That's a great point. Drawing these connections helps us see how legal principles from centuries ago can still offer valuable insights into contemporary ethical and legal dilemmas.
Yeah.
This specific case reminds us that while specific laws and punishments evolve over time, the underlying principles, like the sanctity of life, often remain relevant and continue to shape our understanding of justice and morality.
It's truly fascinating to see how these ancient texts can spark such thought-provoking conversations about modern issues.
It is.
I'm curious to see what other insights we'll uncover as we continue our exploration of Sahih Muslim, Book 16. It's amazing how these stories, though, rooted in like a specific time and place, can spark such profound reflection on universal themes as we continue exploring Sahih Muslim Book 16.
Okay.
I'm particularly struck by the balance it presents between justice, retribution, and the power of forgiveness.
What's fascinating here is how these legal precedents offer a glimpse into a society wrestling with those very concepts. Establishing a system that upholds justice while acknowledging the complexities of human nature and the potential for redemption.
We've seen cases where the punishments were quite severe, even shocking to our modern sensibilities. But then we also encounter instances where mercy and forgiveness take center stage, offering a powerful counterpoint to the harsher aspects of the law.
Exactly. It's not just about an eye for an eye, but also about recognizing the transformative potential of forgiveness. Remember that story of the man who confesses to killing his brother in a fit of rage? He offers his meager possessions as compensation, acknowledging the weight of his actions.
And the Prophet gives the victim's brother a choice to demand retribution or to pardon the killer.
It's a moment fraught with tension, the raw grief of loss clashing with the possibility of mercy.
What's truly remarkable is how the Prophet highlights the spiritual benefit of forgiveness.
Right.
He explains that by choosing mercy, the victim's brother would not only be pardoning the murderer, but also taking on the burden of sin for both individuals.
That's such a profound concept.
It is.
It suggests that forgiveness isn't just about letting go of anger or resentment, but about actively absorbing the negative consequences of the act and transforming it into an opportunity for spiritual growth.
It challenges the very notion of justice as purely punitive.
It does.
It suggests that true justice might involve acknowledging the humanity of both the victim and the perpetrator, recognizing that even in the darkest of deeds, there's potential for remorse, atonement, and ultimately healing.
And the brother, moved by the Prophet's words, chooses forgiveness.
Wow.
It's a powerful testament to the human capacity for empathy and the transformative power of mercy, even in the face of immense loss.
It beautifully illustrates the balance within Islamic jurisprudence, the emphasis on justice, but also the recognition of forgiveness as this higher virtue, a path to breaking these cycles of violence and vengeance.
These stories remind us that legal systems are not static.
Right.
They evolve reflecting the values and challenges of their time.
So what does this all mean for us to the listeners today?
Yeah.
We're centuries removed from the world of these texts, but their echoes still resonate.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, I think it encourages us to engage in some critical reflection,
Yeah.
How do these ancient legal principles resonate with our own understanding of justice and morality? Do they challenge our assumptions about punishment, forgiveness, and the complexities of building a just society?
It's an invitation to delve deeper into the evolution of legal systems.
Right.
And to consider how we might integrate compassion and understanding into our own pursuit of justice.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that while times change,
Yeah.
the fundamental questions about how we live together, how we deal with conflict, and how we balance individual rights with the needs of the community, these remain constant.
This deep dive into Sahih Muslim Book 16 has been a truly enriching journey.
It has.
We've encountered stories that are both challenging and inspiring,
Yeah.
offering a glimpse into the legal landscape of early Islamic society, and prompting us to consider how these principles might inform our own understanding of justice and morality.
We've seen the emphasis on justice.
Yeah.
The struggle to define appropriate punishments.
Right.
The power of oaths. The sanctity of life, even in its earliest stages, and the profound impact of mercy and forgiveness.
It's left me pondering how these ancient legal precedents, with all their complexities and nuances, can still speak to us across the centuries, challenging us to think critically about the values that shape our own world today.
That's the beauty of engaging with these texts.
Yeah.
They offer us not easy answers, but a framework for asking meaningful questions. Questions that each of us must grapple with as we strive to build a more just and compassionate world.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Sahih Muslim Book 16.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, keep seeking knowledge.
Yes.
Keep asking questions.
Keep learning.
And keep exploring the echoes of history that continue to shape our present.